you for hosting us today. That's this amazing space. Greatly appreciate it. I want to thank the Gates Foundation. Kim Brown, I think you are on video or online. I can't really see you, but tremendously generous support from tremendously generous support from the Gates Foundation. And Kim has not just been a funder; she's been an amazing thought partner, thought leader with us throughout. So appreciate Gates Foundation. Thank you to the whole Next Street team who has brought together all of the content to make this possible. And then lastly, thank you to everybody who made it here today, who's in the room, who's on video. I think this is probably the absolute last day that we could possibly do something before the holidays. And so for everybody who made it out, we appreciate you. Thank you. It's a really good group. So I'll start by introducing myself. I'm Michael Roth, co-CEO of Next Street, alongside my two partners who are going to be leading the Zoom room, Charisse Conan-Johnson and Sam Berg, who I'll bring them in a second. I want to give this work. Okay, just a brief overview of Next Street, who we are. We're a leading small business and supplier solutions company for the new economy. We partner with government organizations, state and local, and corporations to ensure small business and suppliers get access to the right resources at the right time. And we're incredibly proud. The impact of our work speaks for itself. We have served a record this year, more than 200,000 small businesses and suppliers directly this year. And in our history have connected them to more than $4.5 billion of capital and opened up more than $10 billion in procurement opportunities for small businesses and suppliers. An overview of what we actually do: we work with governments and corporations on ecosystem assessment and industrial strategies, like we did with Jonathan Smith, who's here in Michigan. We do coalition building with the example of the Economic Opportunity Coalition, which I know a number of folks here have been a part of. Supplier capital solutions, which I met somebody from Cook County earlier. There you are, amazing partner. Supplier program design and delivery, and supplier resources and capital hubs, which we're going to be proud to launch in Michigan and Los Angeles later this year. With that, I'm going to let my co-CEOs, Charisse and Sam, introduce themselves.
Fantastic. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Oh, fantastic. Good morning, and thank you, Michael. It is a pleasure to be here with you. I am Charisse Conan-Johnson, and I am one of the three. In addition to our collective responsibility of leading the firm forward, just by way of my permit in terms of overseeing our revenue, our people and culture, our finance and operations, as well as board oversight. And so it is this leadership structure that has allowed us to really execute and live out the vision of Next Street. And so I welcome you. It's been an exciting couple of years because this industrial procurement revolution is really happening. And that is so exciting. We wrote an article last year with, I believe, Xavier D'Souza, who is in the room, Briggs from Brookings, as well as Bruce Katz from the Norwalk Metro Finance Lab. And ultimately, the opportunity and the time is now. And so I welcome you and I thank you for coming. I'll pass it over to my partner in good, Sam.
Thank you so much, Charisse. And it's great to see all of you in the room and to see folks online. Thank you so much for coming, as Michael said, and thank you for all the work that's gone into this. My name is Samantha Berg. I go by Sam. I have the pleasure of working not only with my esteemed co-CEOs, but with the full Next Street team and many of you on this call. and in the room. My team has oversight, or I have oversight over what we call the delivery team. And so any project that we work on, my team touches, and we try to deliver with excellence. So we've worked on Cook County. We've worked on the initiative for inclusive entrepreneurship with the Milken Institute. We've worked on many other projects, the supplier projects that we're working on in Michigan and in Los Angeles, and really excited to be with you today. Sharice and I are going to be moderating the discussion online, and we're looking forward to hearing from those in the room.
Thank you, Sam. Thanks, Sharice. And I'm going to bring Troy from Milken Institute up to introduce himself and Milken Institute.
Good morning, everybody.
Good morning.
Good morning. It's a pleasure to have you here. My name is Troy Duffy. I'm a director here at the Milken Institute. It is so wonderful to see so many familiar faces. I started or met many of you at the top of this year at an event we held in Michigan with the public finance team / the 10,000 Communities Initiative, and that work has continued to grow and expand. I've met all of the co-CEOs of Next Street at various points in that journey of the year. It's good to see Andy. We're really grateful to be hosting you all here at the Milken Institute. For those of you who are aware, and for some of you who are not, the Milken Institute is a nonprofit, nonpartisan institute based in Los Angeles with offices in Washington, D.C. You're sitting in that office, in those offices right now. We're actually going to be opening our American Dream Discovery Center, those beautiful historic bank halls from the Riggs Banks on July 4th of 2025 of this year. And so we're feverishly working to get that work done. Right now, you'll hear some of that construction throughout the day, but I just want to give you some context here. You're currently sitting in our conference center, and that conference center holds events just like this, but you all are one of the very first. And so you should give yourselves a round of applause that we were able to pull that off. We're very excited. Our work is focused on 3 different areas: health, and for us, it's making sure that the healthcare system and the systems that make the healthcare system possible, academia, philanthropy, government, are working together more efficiently to get drugs and vaccines online faster. The next thing we do is philanthropy, and the idea is helping for folks who want to give away money to give it away more effectively. And so we'll bring together coalitions, we'll help them start a foundation, we'll partner them with other organizations to make sure that they're not working by themselves, as folks can tend to do, but they're working with other people who are working on the same projects. And then we work on finance, and it's really this idea of finance as a force for good. And that work includes our initiative for inclusive entrepreneurship that we're working on with Next Street, and Next Street's a partner with. It includes our work that you'll hear Rachel Fox-Smotherman talk about later on today. And so we're incredibly excited to have you here. Thank you so much for joining us. If you need anything throughout the day, do not ask me. I'm the wrong person. But Rachel is here, Nicole is here, and I'll be bopping in and out, and I'm happy to be helpful wherever I can. Thank you all so much for coming.
Okay, so I want to start off by telling you a little story about a man named Javier Diaz. He is 22 years ago, he gave up his job, he gave up his salary, he invested everything that he had into building his dream, which was a helicopter company called Wings Air Helicopters. Wings Air Helicopters for 22 years has provided helicopter charter, tours, aerial surveys, TV and movie production services across New York City. That is their core business. In the last 5 years, Javier's business has taken a downturn. The industry is just not doing well, and he has been having a hard time figuring out what is next and whether or not his business actually has a place in the new economy that we're building. Introduce Equinor. Equinor is one of the largest energy manufacturers in the world. They are building they're making a $2 billion investment in offshore wind farms across New York City. In that $2 billion investment, they need to build out their entire supply chain. And when they looked across New York City to see what businesses could fill that supply chain, they didn't find anyone. And it's not surprising, because who in New York City possibly would have had an offshore wind business before Equinor came along? It didn't exist. The industry did not exist. And so you might be asking, how does this helicopter company and the offshore wind company relate to each other? And the answer is, we helped, along with public sector folks, technical assistance providers, workforce development providers, we helped the helicopter company pivot into offshore wind so that they are now positioned to be the transport company for offshore wind. You might be asking, or you might be thinking, I never knew that helicopters were a part of the offshore wind supply chain. You're not alone. Javier also had no clue. Coming into the program, Javier had no idea that the offshore wind industry existed, that there was an opportunity for him in it, and that that was actually going to be the future that he could build his entire business on. And so that is the type of pivot, that is the type of business that has a massive opportunity where together we can actually build bridges of opportunity for businesses like Javier's to get into industries in the new economy. And that story is just a single small story that is part of something way larger. Javier is just one of millions of businesses that don't see themselves in the future of the economy, who have a workforce that don't necessarily see themselves in the future of the economy. And Equinor is just a tiny fraction of the trillions of dollars that are being invested in sectors like manufacturing, energy production, infrastructure, that don't actually exist today. And so it takes everybody in the room. We have people from the public sector like Jonathan and Ben who are able to corral people and actually make things happen and coordinate across the ecosystem. We have capital providers on the phone who are able to actually fund businesses like Javier's and help them pivot. We have technical assistance providers who can work with businesses to actually pivot and grow their skills in order to get into the new economy. And it takes everybody. And with this size of investment that we're talking about, more than $2 trillion, it's going to take an effort of Marshall Plan proportions, a Marshall Plan-like effort around small businesses to help small businesses bridge into the new economy, to take advantage of the economic competitiveness that the United States is building. So what is the purpose of this forum? Why are we here? So at the very start of this movement, we want to bring together stakeholders from national and regional leaders from across government, industry, and other institutions to address the small business challenges and opportunities in evolving industrial supply chains. And we want this forum, this first one, to serve as a platform for knowledge sharing, collaboration, and capacity building in critical sectors across the country. Today, we're going to try to elevate things that work, that actually equip small businesses and their workers to compete in and benefit from the industrial transformation. This is going to be the basis of a national knowledge network among stakeholders across industries and sectors. We're going to introduce something today right after this, the Marshall Plan for Small Business, that needs to be built out, needs to have input and thoughts from practitioners in the field. And so we're going to start to work on that today. And we're going to demonstrate the impact of regional initiatives as models to reach national scale. So that's what we're here for today. Before we go into the actual content, the meat of the presentation, given that one of the purposes of this is to convene people and to share knowledge, we need to loosen up a little bit and get to know each other a little bit. So if anyone's been to any sort of convening with me. They know that I love really corny icebreakers. So, and I'm gonna ask folks online to participate as well. And I'm gonna ask some really tough questions for you all to answer. So first, I'm gonna ask you to either stand up or raise your hand if you're online if you drank coffee this morning. Love the audience participation. All right, thank you. Now I want you to stand up or raise your hand. Get your hands down if I want you to stand up if you're a tea person and you had some tea this morning. Right. But it's mighty. It's the mighty group. Okay. So now I want you to stand up if you have worked or do work in the public sector. It's a good amount. Okay, thank you. Now stand up if you have worked or do work in the private sector. All right. A lot of people who have gone between public and private sector. Stand up if you have worked or do work in philanthropy or the social sector. Beautiful, thank you. I could go all day. Stand up or raise your hand if you are deeply passionate about small business and the future that they have in the economy. All right. So now I know who is not paying attention online. But this is what I just want you to look around for a second before you sit down. Okay, you guys get it. But we're gonna be talking today and across the you can sit down. We're gonna be talking today and across the next years to come. This is a decades-long effort. And I just want everybody comes from a diverse background. We're going to need collaboration across the public sector, across the private sector, across the social sector, at a national level, at a local level, to all be working together. And today, there might be differences in how we talk about things. We might have differences in experiences. We might have differences in priorities, but know that everybody in this room who's part of this believes in small business, cares deeply about them, and that is the core of why we are here. And so, appreciate you working through my corny little icebreaker, and just take that with us into today, into the holidays, into the years to come, that we're going to build out this infrastructure together. So with that, we're going to actually get into some substance, and I'm going to invite up my colleagues, Spencer Lau and Zav Briggs. Spencer Lau is at Next Street, a director who oversees all of our supply chain work, and Zav at Brookings Institute. You all have their bios, so I won't read you their actual bios. I'll just give you a little fun fact that you won't find in there, which is Spencer is going to create through slides. But another amazing thing about Spencer is he to be a professional musician and is incredibly talented. And Zav, if you're, I think, in any city across the US and want to navigate through a park, Zav is your guy. He has shown me parts of Rock Creek and Prospect Park that I didn't know exist. So with that, I'm going to invite them up to take over here.
Hello, everyone. Exciting that we're all here, and for those over Zoom as well. So just in the context of what we're going to be doing today, we're going to start with this presentation that's going to get into the details of what is this Marshall Plan for small business in which we're calling for. And then the hope for thereafter is to really dive into, so what does that mean, to Michael's point about that collaboration between the public, private, and civic sectors. And so there'll be a series of presentations and breakouts in which we'll be talking about what that practically means in each part of what we're going to be calling for, with the hope that this will be the continuation of really the kickoff of this forum that we're hoping to build out with those in the room, those virtually, and those who will continue to learn about this effort from here. But with that, so what is this moment? How do we want to think about this in this context? Earlier this week, Zab and I actually published an editorial that really articulated what this current moment actually means. We have trillions of dollars from the public and private sectors that are being invested in at this moment for real focus in terms of new economies around infrastructure, manufacturing, and energy and utilities that are some of the biggest bets in strategic sectors in generations. And with that, it presents a massive opportunity as we're thinking about really how to boost American economic competitiveness and national security that really is critical in terms of these supply chains as we move forward. But there's also another question about how do we make sure that these investments are actually being realized and creating economic opportunities for communities and workers and businesses as we really think about that, as well as what does it mean in terms of the new supply chains that are going to be built out in really the critical sectors that we're really seeing from here. And it creates a more important role for small businesses and their workers at this moment to be able to build out the productive capacity within the country that's absolutely needed for this next set of developments within the US. And so what we'll be walking through today is really diving into what those dynamics are. And Zab will be walking through that in just a second, as well as then what does this mean in terms of both the massive opportunities and challenges for small businesses and their workers at this moment? And what is this Marshall Plan for small business at this moment? And so we'll go through all of that. But really the intention for this is to indicate where we are right now, what the massive opportunity and challenge we have, and to really start the conversation from here about how do we really form a Marshall Plan for small business in this context as it's critically needed within the country. And so with that, I'll pass it over to Zav to talk a little bit more about the transition.
Thanks. Just one tech question, you guys. Are we able to roll up the virtual tiles over there so we don't hide as much of the?
Yeah.
Is that easy?
So. Yeah, I'll do it.
Okay, just if we can. Good morning, everybody. It's great to be with you. As Michael mentioned, I am with the Brookings Institution, and we've been doing work for a long time on economic growth and how to make it inclusive, both here in America and abroad. We're going to draw on a few things from the new piece that was published just yesterday, and our starting point for it is very much where Spencer left off. One clarion signal election is that Americans of all backgrounds want an affordable cost of living and good jobs, an opportunity that starts here and grows here. And there's some really important dimensions to that. Let me make sure that this thing, there we go. I want to share with you, and we all have this in mind to some degree, but we want to level set a little bit, set a foundation for the day and the conversation we're going to have. I want to show you the scale of what's going on. It's a little hard to wrap our heads around. The scale of it and the spread of it. And the spread in two senses, okay? Across sectors, number one, a lot going on in manufacturing, a lot going on in infrastructure, and that means many things. Michael made reference to offshore wind, for example, just one area with many, many business opportunities just in that one area. And there are many others also taking off. So the spread in the sense of across sectors, industry niches. But number two, regions of the country, of course. The infrastructure stuff, as you probably know, is going everywhere on some scale. That's in the nature of enhancing our country's infrastructure, and on a scale we haven't seen since we built the interstate highway system 60 years ago, okay? But we also see a lot of regional concentration too, and the scale of that is emerging in a really interesting way. So enough preview. I'll show you some maps. I'll show you little bits of data, and we'll try to tease out why it matters so much. This first one makes a couple of points, the public and private investments, what we've seen so far and what's projected. As you know, one of the important roles of public investment, and we see this around the world, not unique to America, is that when done well, it catalyzes enormous private investment too. Sometimes it's co-invested right alongside in some of the same ventures, or infrastructure projects. Sometimes it acts as early stage capital, kind of a little upfront. The private sector doesn't always want to take on its own. Many different forms. The scale of this is extraordinary, and it is taking the form of these infrastructure investments in all the major subsectors of infrastructure, and also really important manufacturing bets. And I want to show you those in a little more detail in a moment. One of the key implications of this too is the last point on this slide, what you see in boldface there. And that is simply that this investment, while wonderful, is making enormous new demands that we are not yet set up to respond to. It's a simple fact. It's not like we spent the last decade making our talent ready, making our supply chains ready, creating the agility and the adaptability that Michael referred to when he told you those stories of specific enterprises. We didn't. And now here we are. But the good news is a lot of this investment is going to unfold over years. We have time, if we are intentional, to get this right, and to learn from what other countries have done as well. We lag in a number of ways. Not only have we starved our infrastructure, just as one example, and our manufacturing economy in a number of ways, but our firms, including many small and mid-sized businesses, do not rate as high on productivity as counterparts overseas, for example, in the EU. Our workers, by some measures, likewise, not quite there yet, but could be, can be. We've got to be intentional about it. This is the overall scale, and this is mostly, by the way, manufacturing, the true industrial landscape. This number gets even bigger depending on what we count. Let me show you a few more details. The macro conditions, and we write about them in the piece. Hope you'll take a look at it if you haven't already, and please share it with folks that you think need to understand this stuff. It's a quick read, kind of walks you through and connects these dots. Macro conditions are pretty important, and they point to predictability, the ability to make investments over years and years and not think of this as some kind of on-off switch or stimulus spending. It is simply not that. I know we know that, but I want to say it out loud. You know, it's not this sudden investment for short-term boost. It's about a longer run shift in the kind of economy we want to have. And it's driven by things like geopolitical conflict, supply chain breakdowns, serious concerns about energy security and diversifying our energy base so we have a wider range of sources of it for many reasons, not just reducing carbon emissions, but again, the reliability of our system and the ability to keep growing and serve all of our people and serve them in an affordable way and serve our businesses. It means a new paradigm, and we think it's got some big components from a major increase in capital investment, the reshoring and so-called nearshoring to allies offshore, the energy diversification I mentioned, and critically, this renewal of what's generally referred to as the defense industrial base. The national security community is extremely concerned about this and very eager to strengthen the kinds of businesses that can renew this base. And many of these businesses can serve civilian sectors as well as defense. So that's really important to keep in mind too. I told you it was it's a spread. Whatever sectors you most pay attention to, work into, it's worth thinking about the sheer spectrum of this. The left side is infrastructure, and it's infrastructure of many kinds. The bill that passed at the end of 2021, and it is set for allocation across the land and over multiple years. A lot of it works by formula, by the way, so it goes out to states and they decide on. Some of it is more competitive. There are innovation dollars. There's also money to repair our aging infrastructure. I think something that we're all aware of, whether it's roads, airports, ports, all of that. And then multiple types of manufacturing. So EVs get a lot of attention for given reasons. Batteries and the battery supply chain. I'll show you maps in a moment. That's concentrating in some really interesting ways in the South and the Midwest for the most part. But it's also biomanufacturing and a host of other sectors that aren't necessarily in the public eye or in the news media every day, but they're tremendously important and they're full of innovation. Michael showed you an example of a business pivoting into serving offshore wind. Friends in the room know that I lead a weird life, given what I do on economic growth and on equity. Offshore wind is, I'm also a recovering engineer. Offshore wind is one of them. And offshore wind is comparatively new for America, not entirely new, but it's been limited to kind of 1 or 2 regions. And it is growing. The first Pacific Ocean leases, for example, were auctioned by the federal government just about 18 months ago, just to give you a sense of how recent it is. States from New Jersey to North Carolina to others are really invested in this. The appeal is enormous. Just to build and to service one offshore wind farm, you basically got to create an industrial complex on land. The port upgrades alone are massive. To move the material through, to be able to build the thing, to service it over time. The connections to the grid, again, are massive. We're not talking small interconnections, but big grid upgrades to be able to handle the power, move it to where it's supposed to go. And the list goes on and on. This industrial transformation can be measured in any number of ways. I'm going to stick with an easy one, just for the sake of time and to get you to the geography, which I think is so interesting. That upper right chart that you see is energy investment. And the story that's been told to date, especially in the last couple of years, has focused quite a bit on energy. And for straightforward reasons, of course, we have seen a tremendous uptick. It began before President Biden took office, accelerated greatly over the last several years, thanks to the administration and allies in Congress, and increasingly a bipartisan message that a diversified energy base that includes renewable energy and other types is tremendously important and to all parts of the country and all industries. But you can see growth overall, and it's of multiple kinds. Again, it's not that something is completely disappearing and it's all becoming one source. It's multiple sources, and the growth is very large, and it is projected to continue for many reasons, including, for example, the growth of generative AI and plans to deploy it. It's very energy intensive. This is getting a lot of attention right now. It's even leading major tech companies to sign commitments to buy nuclear power. They're reactivating one of the 3 Mile Island towers and also betting on next generation nuclear modular reactors that aren't even operating yet. And the scale of this is enormous. And again, when you hear that, it's not one thing. It's many kinds of businesses that then have to service and help construct those facilities and make use of the power that they produce. Whoops. Let's talk geography for a moment. On the left side, you see the scale by state. And of course, that rolls up lots of different kinds of investment. And the big states, some of our biggest, sure enough, Florida, Texas, California, a handful of others, are receiving some of the largest aggregate amounts. No surprise, given population and where certain industries are concentrated. But the takeaway, I think, for that map on the left is the investment is going everywhere to different degrees, even some of the less densely populated parts of the country, because the infrastructure renewal alone needs to happen everywhere. And that includes things like, of course, not just producing EVs and seeing the automaking and the truck making industry through the biggest transition in 100 years, but making the batteries and the parts for the batteries, and remember the EV charging infrastructure. So that's a huge scale. Again, just that one area, and it has to touch all parts of the country. Drinking water systems, stormwater, fiber optic for expanded broadband connectivity, especially where we don't have it in some of our smaller communities and poorer communities. But look at the one on the right. It's a somewhat different story. It's complementary. Doesn't contradict at all what you see there on the left. The one on the right is private manufacturing investments specifically. So we see several large multi-state hubs emerging. And this is because of each of those big sectors we've talked about, from electric vehicles, or let's call it electric mobility and all the different parts of that, the vehicles, the batteries, et cetera, et cetera. It's also semiconductors, huge bet on that, with world-leading companies from Taiwan Semiconductor, Micron, Intel, et cetera. And it's a number of other areas of manufacturing as well. And some of the supply sheds for these things, on one level, they're global, but with a lot of onshoring going on. So a big appetite to source more locally. What does locally mean? If you're in Syracuse and you're Micron and you're building one of the largest fabs in the world, if you think in decades, not months or short years, think about supplier development, and you can do that. You can make these bets, kind of like, to give you an example, the way BMW did in South Carolina, beginning 30 years ago. Went all across the region and said, how do we innovate together right here in this region? We don't want to ship our critical parts from halfway around the world. We want to innovate with you. Went to Clemson and said, how do we create, cutting edge, world-class training programs? So we can train and then retrain over the course of their career, our engineers, our manufacturing techs, all of that. Had a transformative impact, of course, on that economy, on that state. It was really hurting after the loss of textile industry and other things in prior decades. But it's an example of what these industrial clusters, sets of related businesses, and the emergence of these very distinct hubs look like for now. And it means an opportunity to innovate, to become more productive, and to create the kinds of arrangements, the kinds of partnerships that we will spend the day exploring in all of these areas and in other communities as well that connect to this tremendous engine of growth and innovation. And with that, I think I'm going to leave it here and hand it back to Spencer to show us what we need to do in broad terms and what we need to talk about today.
Well, I think one thing I learned is that actually both of us are reformed engineers. That's probably the reason why we get along so well as why we care about this work in particular. But I think that the thing that we also got from Icebreaker was that everyone cares about what this means in terms of economic opportunities. And in this context here, as we're thinking about what that really is trickling down to, is that ultimately there's huge demand for small businesses and workers at this moment. And we're seeing that already in some of the work that has been done by Bank of America in looking at their own small business data, that they're seeing increases in terms of their payroll, as well as their actual profitability amongst some of these small businesses that they are directly serving in construction and in manufacturing. And that is largely concentrating in some of the places that Zav was just speaking to in the South and Midwest. And so as a result of it, it really creates something in which there is something budding here, in which really is trying to unleash in a way to ensure that we have the ability to actually meet to the demands around this industrial transformation overall. And so really there is something already starting that over the next decade really requires additional focus in order to build that productive capacity as a result. But there is a challenge in that small businesses play a significant role in the U.S. economy, but how do we actually build it out? And if you see this here, U.S. Small businesses play a significant role in terms of the number of businesses in these sectors, that they have about 50% of U.S. productive capacity in the U.S. For these industrial sectors, and that they're making up 75% of the workforce within small businesses as a result. Additionally, you see that really the base of small and mid-sized businesses are the ones that are really growing fastest, particularly around manufacturing, and trying to get to that next level to be able to meet that scale as a result. And so really the role in which we are talking about in terms of small business is significant as we're thinking about here. But I think when folks think about small business, they think about different things. You might think about a Main Street business that is your local restaurant or dry cleaner. Also might think about a high-tech startup that is requiring different needs at this moment. And so if we're thinking about this in this very context, about these industrial supply chains, the way that we really want to focus on in the conversations we want to have around today is that middle part about these supplier businesses that are supplying goods and services to these critical sectors that are ultimately growing at a rate in which we haven't seen in generations. And they're the ones in which they have real opportunities to not only build out, but have the prospect of seeing core benefits in local communities, as Zav mentioned, as they have local facilities, they have a real need to hire local workers and have the prospect of actually having jobs that are showcasing career pathways that really are projecting growth. But we've been alluding to this whole presentation that there is one huge issue. As it stands right now, we do not have the capacity in the country for this moment. Point blank, I think that the slide that Michael spoke to of that 1 in 3.7 million is just the indication of what that means in terms of this current moment, in terms of how many businesses there are. And to think about the scale of those trillions of dollars that are at hand, that not only do you want to make sure that those businesses are pivoting into those sectors, but that you actually have an expansion of the number of businesses that can actually work in these spaces for them to be able to be a supplier business in this moment. And so that challenge is the challenge of this moment. And as we think about what's going to happen next, in order for those trillions to really get deployed effectively, that there is a real need for that to be built out. In addition to that, small businesses are, of course, the employers' communities. But at this moment, much of the talk about this industrial transformation is about how to make sure that workers actually get access to good jobs that ultimately have self-sustaining wages and ultimately create career pathways from here. But if we don't create that connection point between small businesses and workers to be able to create those good jobs and to sustain them, that we miss a moment at this point in time. And that gets to the last piece, in which this has the prospect of either addressing core inequalities within the country, or it could exacerbate it. And really, if we continue in the same pathways in which we've seen this before, that really there has been a focus more in terms of those very large businesses to continue to win out. And unless we have an intentional approach that requires core focus, then you'll see additional inequality within the country. So, we've been talking about this in terms of that capacity. Productivity aligns with all of those different points in which we have seen, as Zav mentioned, that there really is a distinction that we're seeing within the US around our small businesses in which there is a productivity gap that needs to be filled in this context. And that if you compare the US small business sector to other sectors in advanced economies, that it's either on par and there's a gap between small businesses and larger businesses that are larger than we see in most other places. In addition to that, within the sectors that we're specifically focused on, that gap is really significant, that needs to be fulfilled in order to ensure that we're actually meeting the demands of this industrial transformation. So, I've been talking a lot to you about the problem. So what are the things in which we actually think in terms of the needs from here to create solutions? And what we see across the country, that there's really a core need for ensuring that those businesses like the one that was a helicopter business understands what are the opportunities on their individual scale to be able to pivot and to be able to adapt their capabilities accordingly. And so they need real assistance at this moment to understand what is this macro trend and what that means for me through corporate strategy guidance, through improvements in terms of their product development, and ultimately what that means in terms of going from point A to B, both in terms of pivoting into different industries, as well as scaling their own operations as a result. In addition to that, all of that is nice and well, but it requires investments. And so for these businesses to be able to go from point A to B, that they need additional capital and access to tailored capital that ultimately has the formation of capital that is ultimately needed for direct investments, whether that be for retooling, for a factory, or for general R&D investments, to even strategic investments about M&A if they're looking to potentially partner with another company or acquire one to be able to build out capabilities. And through all of that, that means that we also need to make sure that through those investments gets into workforce, that you have the right skilled workers in small businesses to be able to build out the capabilities accordingly. And so employee development, workforce development, hiring, and training systems are really important at this moment in time. And so through all of this, we've been, again, describing the conditions, but what we were hoping for today is to really get into what this actually means as a collective unit. And from folks who are across all of these sectors, that there is a real need to be able to create a cohesive public-private strategy and plan that has direct actions into activities that ultimately are building out the small business base accordingly. And the call to action that Zav and I had within our piece was really about creating a Marshall Plan for small business on these three pillars, building out national programs that ultimately are leveraging what we see on the ground to be able to scale to this moment so that small businesses understand what this actually means for their direct business. That means capital and financing and expanding access to capital at this moment for those businesses to be able to invest accordingly, to be able to pivot or to expand their capacity accordingly. And through workforce development, that there needs to be have a renewed focus on how small businesses in particular are integrated into small business or workforce development programs, recognizing that systems have historically been focused in larger orientations of businesses rather than integrating into small and mid-sized businesses for their own hiring and employee development. And so with that framing, what we're hoping to do today is to really get into the weeds of what that means in terms of operationalizing this plan. You know, there are a variety of programs that we'll hear about today through different presentations that we're hoping to really spotlight as promising models that we might want to consider for expanding from here across all three pillars. And what we're hoping for through the breakouts is also to get to hear from everybody about the programs that they've been seeing directly in their lines of business, as well as their geographies that will be things to scale. With the recognition that we also need to have coordination across sectors so that this is a single movement to be able to really meet the moment at this point in time. So that's ecosystem coordination and other public-private engagement in which we're hoping for from here. So I'll end with this. You know, as we've been going through all of this, we've been talking about these macro trends and what that means in terms of how we're seeing the US economy move and national security and things that are such large things that are really important in terms of economic competitiveness within the country. But at the end of the day, we all live in different places. And at the end of the day, no matter where you live, what that means in terms of the politics and election outcomes that we've seen, that ultimately the economic opportunities from this moment are real and necessary to address. And for us to be able to meet this moment, that really have a core question of how do we create something that is mobilizing these small businesses and workers in a way in which can actually meet the moment, so that 10 years from now, when we're looking back at this, so that there is actually an infrastructure and manufacturing boom, and we can call it a decade that really is building out America from here. So I'll pause here to see if there are questions, but either on the chat or from folks in the room. And I don't know.
Very thorough.
Yeah. Yes.
Hi, Spencer. And it sounds like I missed an icebreaker earlier today. So I'm Janice Bowdler from the Treasury Department. Couple slides back when Zav was, now I can't remember. I think it was the first slide you presented, the Bank of America analysis.
Mm-hmm.
Did they give a additional breakdown into the characteristics of the businesses that they're supporting? I'm curious about the increase in support for small businesses, but goes to, we know we don't have all of the small businesses and all the components we need to fill supply chains. So do we have a sense in where the demand is and where the white space might be in terms of business development?
Yeah, maybe I'll actually go back to that slide so that we can all see it. A few things. One, in that report, it really did indicate something that's a very immediate piece of it, in which the focus in terms of reshoring as well as infrastructure investments are creating huge demand for businesses in construction industries first. And in that, it's creating opportunities that actually many businesses that are in those fields can actually expand out. And so you're seeing this in terms of growth, in terms of their profitability, as well as their wage growth as a result. The flip side of it, though, that actually in just a second, Jonathan from the state of Michigan will be speaking to, is the bit of the stops and starts that we're seeing within manufacturing at this moment, where we know that there is a significant movement in the next 5 to 10 years towards a certain direction. But what that means in the immediate term is creating some uncertainty about where manufacturers are moving from point A to B and where they want to invest as the flow down across value are creating challenges as a result. And that actually probably is some of the explanation if you look at the chart of why some of the profitability for manufacturing kind of uneven over the last several years. Yeah.
Good morning. Ben Kirshner, sorry I was a little late. I work for here in Pennsylvania. I have a question on, I don't know, maybe go back to the previous slide that triggered a question. It was around, like, I guess I'm trying to get to the how. Some of the problems you're trying to solve for, which I applaud and I'm all for and support, it seems that there are some mechanisms already in place that are doing this, like for financing, there's CDFIs. Like a CDFI, when I talk to CDFIs in Pennsylvania, they said they're the best thing ever. They do this, they're great at it. But clearly you're calling it out, saying the access to capital is just not there. So are you guys like overlaying like what we're already doing today in this Marshall Plan and like what's working or not working? Should we get rid of all CDFIs? Should we double down on CDFIs? Should we reform the CDFIs? Like, do you have any strategies and like what we're gonna overlay and change potentially?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, I think in the context of this, everything should be built off of the existing structure as it stands to then be able to build out. And I think in the context of all of those different programs, that there are programs that we're seeing locally through support for workforce development and business development that we want to make sure are spotlit and are scaled. And like the question as we go through it today is how do we do that through different mechanisms in which people might be able to access those different types of services, or if there needs to be different types of investments through, if we're thinking about capital in particular, that ways that things like, say, for example, the State Small Business Credit Initiative that Treasury and Milken and us are part of, that can leverage those funds in a way that is really targeted to these sectors. Because to that point about small business in general, there are a lot of different levers that are being pulled. There isn't industry-specific modernized support for small businesses in these sectors that is really critical at this moment to be able to build out. So adaptation, potential growth from here, in which the hope through hearing a little bit more about some of the stuff that's on the ground, that you'll start to hear ways in which that could be serving as a model to grow out from here.
Spencer, can I add something
Yeah.
real quick? Really appreciate your question. Thank you. I mean, didn't at all mean to create the impression that we don't have important foundations to build on. We certainly do. I think one way of thinking about this moment is that with precious few exceptions, we haven't done sector strategies all that much in this country. We don't tend to think in terms of knitting the pieces together, fund them separately, we kind of govern them separately, purpose them in this sort of way, which is why we're calling it a Marshall Plan. And it gets to everything from thinking, for example, about the financing challenges across a full spectrum of business. What if you're not just worried about startups, but you want to think about mature incumbent manufacturing suppliers, for example, in your state, but potentially serving OEMs in Ohio and that Micron plant up in Syracuse. You might need an acquisition strategy where someone's retiring, they don't have a succession plan, the opportunity to take on a new business and grow it and make it adapt. Its financing needs, as you know well, I mean, are really distinctive from a neighborhood serving what Spencer called a Main Street business, where CDFIs have long excelled. So we got to think those things through and knit the pieces together.
We have a question from the chat from Joe from Living Cities. And the question is, where are you observing promising private capital disbursement to small businesses that meets the scale of the need?
It's a great question. I think in the context of the recent actions, and I think we mentioned the State Small Business Credit Initiative as a way in which has been a public-private engagement where ultimately the funds from the Department of Treasury are investing into different funding mechanisms in which then ultimately expands private coverage that really we see as important to be able to expand at the pool and availability of capital at this moment. But to Zaz's very point, there's the question in terms of availability of capital and how do you have access to a huge volume of capital, but then how do you then tailor it to this specific the small businesses that are needed, that many CDFIs and many others that are directly financing through SSBCI are not well equipped for. And so how do you ensure that ultimately there are models in which supplier financing, contract financing, other types of very tailored products for businesses in these sectors are also being paired with that availability of capital that is growing through a lot of the public-private investments that are expanding the total pool of capital that's available.
Hi, Madeline Brown, also from Genesis team at Treasury. There was a number that 21%, I think, are growing. There's a number on a slide. I'm curious how we should be interpreting that figure as will we know we're successful if that number grows, if more small businesses are looking to scale, or is that just sort of, or is it the opposite? Will we know we're successful if we sort of can maintain small and mid-sized businesses as small and mid-sized businesses, but pivot it to these new industry, finance, well-connected?
Yeah, it's a really great question. I think it's, at this point in time, our call is that all and everything is needed. That if you can scale a business from small and mid-sized to something that's a bit larger that can the productive capacity, that's one area of it. Also, how do you ensure that perhaps there are small businesses that are in adjacent sectors like that helicopter business that could pivot into it, that might stay within the same size, but may actually be supplying the goods or services that are necessary at this moment. So I think in this context, it's both and, in which we want to make sure that there is prospects for growth for those small businesses to be able to grow, as well as ensuring that those who perhaps are in adjacent industries can move from point A to B in order to supply at this moment. These are all really great questions that we want to go into discussion